I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us a popular guest. As a matter of fact, many of you have been pinging me and asking for the guest that's out with this his latest report. He's on our on-air air. You see here the Jetson type vehicle. His newest report is called the Soaring 20s. You kind of gives it away right here. HalfPastHuman.com. Of course, it is Clif High of HalfPastHuman.com, out with a brand new report. Thank you for starting the brand new year with us, Clif High. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com again. Welcome back.
Thank you much. It's nice to be here.
I got to tell you, you made some huge calls on I'm just going to go by the calls I heard and the calls you made on the air. And I tell people that you'll be the first to say you're not 100%, but whoo, man, some of the calls you made, you said that Donald Trump would be elected pretty big. If they don't cheat, basically. But he did elected pretty big. I think they cheated, but he still got elected big. You also said the night of the election, our data sets say that Hillary Clinton goes missing. She goes missing. Sure enough, she did go missing. You also said Bitcoin would hit 13.8 by February of 2018. Sorry, you were low and early. Hit, 20,000, and now it's bouncing all over the place. We'll talk about Bitcoin and where you see it going. But you also said this, and this is where I want to start. And that you said, about a third of the mainstream media, they're going to take a hit. They're going to have some sexual problems. My data sets are saying sexual problems, misconducts, cover-ups, things like that. Wow! Another unbelievable hit that you got out of your predictive analysis, your predictive linguistics, as you call it. Unbelievable. Tell me, is that over? Is the rampage, is the revealing of all this sexual misconduct over in the mainstream media?
No, the part we saw in 2017 was just it was kind of like the titles. We've got the main feature coming up in 2018 and 19.
What does that mean, main feature? Explain.
That the amount of volume of words involved in this scandal is going to quadruple or larger. It'll take a couple of years to lay out. It'll involve maybe as much as a third or more of Congress, many of whom will elect to simply not continue in order to sort of sidestep or try to sidestep legal issues as a result of their past behavior. But a number of them will actually be plucked out, according to our data sets. And by the plucking out, there's a lot of words around arrests and this kind of thing. I don't know how you arrest a sitting member of Congress, but that's what the data seems to indicate.
Wow.
And so we're looking at 2 years of the unfolding. So it'll peak probably this time next year and then slowly fade off and the legal stuff be done in 2019.
Well, what about the mainstream media? Is the carnage there over? You said about a third would be... Go ahead.
Yeah, it hasn't even started, Greg. I mean, we've got the few people off the top. It's just going to roll out. Now, what's occurred is you've seen the main headliners, okay, and so now there's going to be all kinds of rollouts into the back office, into the supporting cast, and into I don't know what they call them in the movie business, but those people that do things, build sets and do CGI and all of this. So it's not just within this narrow niche of the visible media. It's a wider kind of an effect within the media per se, and it will indeed ripple out into the pedophilia in a very large way. And the data sets seem to indicate that some of the people that are taking hits now are doing so because they know there's far worse crimes they could be accused of. And so they're happy to get out of town, get out of Dodge on just this little charge, so to speak.
Ooh, that's pretty interesting. Far worse crimes. Are some of them going to just stick around until they have the pedophilia, the child sex, whatever you want to call it, come down on them?
Yep, you can't cure stupid.
So more big name people. So basically the sex charges so far, the heterosexual sex charges, the women, the men on women, basically going after people that work for them or whatever, the Matt Lauer things with a button on the door, that goofy stuff. That's the low hanging fruit.
Correct.
The heavier.
And it's going to get.
Go ahead.
I would say it's going to get to the point where the data, like maybe it was 2 years ago we started getting hints of it, and I started writing about it. But it's going to get to the point where there's a sort of a social revolution within the USA dollar empire. So it'll extend out into Canada, to the EU to some extent, to Great Britain a great deal, and to some extent into Australia. But what's going to happen is the backlash against this is going to be so deep that you will find citizens forming groups that are going out and basically scrubbing media and examining all kinds of videos, old movies, and this kind of thing, coming up with, I guess you'd have to say, evidence or evidentiary threads for some purpose. Now, I don't know what that purpose is. It was never clear on the data. But as a side set to that, we had the idea that there would be actual constraints, legal constraints put on companies like Disney, and that Disney will get, and other major media for children will have minders put in there, in a similar fashion to what we used to see with the censors, the official movie censors, back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. They evolved into that period of time in the last century. We're going to see something similar to that, only it's not going to be about, it's going to be about the images that these companies are allowed to put out on recordings and on videos, but also it's going to be about their internal behavior. And so I expect that the reason that I have this suspicion is that there are data sets that suggest that there's going to be something of an uproar as parts of this are subbed out to business. In other words, some companies are going to be formed that are basically going to be like compliance companies, and they'll be hired by the government to go and mind and sit and watch these people do work and tell them, no, that's against the rules. You can't do that. We're not allowing this image to go out. The social consciousness is not enhanced by this, and so you can't do that.
And do you think when you say minders, there won't be any kids back in the dressing rooms with adults that aren't accompanied? You're talking about that kind of minders.
Yes.
That. What are you doing? Where are you going?
Right. Well, it's much beyond that, though. Much beyond that. You'll actually have people that will say, no, you can't put this image in that cartoon. And, oh, by the way, we're going to run all of your media through a subliminal message software analysis program to see if you're sneaking anything in we don't like.
And last question on this case: are there going to be arrests, court cases, criminal? I mean, it's one thing to have a civil suit with a woman, saying that you made sexual advances, or a criminal case. There's been some criminal things done to these women. Quite another thing. I mean, it's just another higher bar when you're doing things to children. Are there going to be a court cases involving sex crimes against children?
Yes, and that'll continue out through 2022 in terms of our data sets. So most of the big bulge of the accretion of the new data is about this time next year. So it's still it's a building process. We're still far and away in very early days.
And you're talking about sex crimes against children mostly?
Correct.
Wow.
It's going to be an interesting world, Greg. I mean, the backlash is going to literally alter the way that people think about the media to a certain extent. So they'll actually see the media not as their friends anymore, but something to be guarded against, such that when we actually get to the point that the legal people, the legislative branch decides to promulgate laws that then go into the minders, they're going to find that the general mass of society really does support it.
And that was something else you brought up, another big call. You said the media was going to take some big hits. And continue to take some big hits. I was kind of dumb. I thought after the election, okay, wow, this didn't work out well. Let's go back to being, news organizations. But no, they tripled down on being propagandists and lying. And you said that they were going to take big hits. Please explain.
Well, as I was saying earlier, you can't cure stupid. the media controllers are on a particular path that they don't have any way of backing off of, and so we're not going to go back and recover the kind of media that we had in the last century, say prior to Nixon, okay, where we had some really honest journalism going on all the time. We're not going to go back to that with corporate media. What we do have is the rise of the alternative media, just basically getting up and kicking ass on existing large-scale corporate media, such that by 2019, the landscape is essentially 100% changed. This will also be impacted by finances and demographics, because the dwindling number of audience for the existing, what we think of as mainstream media, is going to get to the point where it's too small to actually support them against rising charges. Bear in mind that these companies are going to face huge levels of economic liability as a lot more information comes on out and they start getting sued. So one of the temporal markers we have for 2018, in a general sense that's spread throughout chunks of the year, is the idea of lawsuits originating. I don't know if it's class action or individual or what the circumstances are, but going to specifically to media lying. And, it may be now kosher for the media to lie because they've been given some level of government protection with their Propaganda Act, but the data is suggesting that somebody's going to find a legal means to sue what we think of as the mainstream media for I guess you'd say, consumer fraud.
Oh, wow! Wow! I'm stunned. You got sue for consumer fraud. I want to ask one other thing, and I want to. I'm sorry. I'm writing this. I'm writing down notes. That's crazy. It's very interesting.
No, hold me to it.
And judging from your stuff, I'm telling you, I'm just bringing up the stuff that you told me on my air that was right, which is pretty amazing. Are you 100% right? No, and you'll say that, but boy, you have some pretty big calls. I want to ask this question this way: is Donald Trump going to win the fake news wars?
Yes.
Explain.
There's a conjunction of data sets that indicate that our social order is in the midst of a major change. And this major change will continue on through about 2022, which is why the current report is set up that way, going out 5 years. Plus, we had a lot of long-term data I was able to mine. Within that area, we have these conjunction of sets that show that the rising outrage against individual crimes within media will combine with this sort of a cover your ass kind of a thing that will come out of the legislative branches that will try and piggyback on this general, we're dissatisfied with the media and the direction that things are going and so on. Then we'll get the consumer fraud kind of suits coming up. And all of these things will be in conjunction with the continued investigation into the crimes and the elimination of a number of very key players. So we have to look at it a different way than a usual kind of battle between politicos and their media stooges. Because in this regard, we've got a number of the major media people that will be plucked out due to their past actions, due to their crimes, at a very key moment, thus rendering the decision-making processes within these organizations damaged just at the time they need to have cohesive, clear thinking in order to survive. So a lot of them will not survive. So
wow.
Our data sets are not being particularly kind at the moment to the idea of CNN even existing as we understand it now 2 years out, that kind of thing. I just choose them as an example. It's not going to be limited to them by any means.
Wow. I got to tell you, when I worked at CNN, I did not do fake news. They paid me to do hard-hitting investigations. I did big frauds. I did depleted uranium munitions against the military. Of course, maybe that's why I'm out. But anyway, they weren't that way when I was there. An unbelievable amount of supervision, of legal standards. The journalists, your bosses. I mean, you didn't say anything without everybody knowing about it. There wasn't unless you were on the White House lawn and you did a live shot. I mean, this stuff where they're going after the president, oh, well, we had two sources. What? Who vetted that? Are you crazy?
Well, one of them was a dog.
I mean, yeah, I've said this before. I mean, this whole thing with the Comey deal, where
Yeah.
the reporter goes to his boss. I got to go out and they got this thing. Hey, boss, I got this thing about obstruction of justice with the president. Great. Who's your source? I can't tell you. Do you have any documents? Yes, I got a letter. Okay. Do you have it? No, they're going to read it to me on the phone. Go for it. Green light. It's the president of the United States. Go for it. I mean, it's stupid. Anyway,
Yeah.
I can
You
see
can't
why
cure
they could,
stupid, yeah.
you can't. I can see why. I want to go on to the economy. The big Tax and Jobs Act. I mean, that people are calling it the Trump's tax cuts. I had Martin Armstrong on talking about how people overseas. And this is real world stuff, and you can blend it into what you're getting in your predictive linguistics. He says, I was summoned to London. The Chinese are freaking out. They're bringing back, at least in one report, the big banks say $2.5 trillion. Donald Trump's blurted out, I think it's twice that much, $5 trillion overseas, coming back at a 15.5% rate. No questions asked. No questions asked. No matter how you made the money, this is bizarre. Talk about legal money laundering. Also, he said that the EU he had to talk to the Chinese in London out on his way down to the EU, down to Brussels, because they're freaking out as well. What about all this money coming back? Are you getting anything on the Trump tax cuts? And let's start with the money coming back from abroad. It's evidently a couple of trillion at least.
We've got a really interesting set of data here that's been building for some time, and we've had this big flush of long-term data, which is why I decided to do this report that was going out 5 years. And if you'll notice, I named it the Soaring 20s, even though we're not into the 2020s yet, right? It's because we're able at this stage within the data sets to give a broad definition to what's coming. And our 2020s, to some extent, emotionally, are replicating the kind of language you would see in the newspapers and even to a certain extent in the limited newsreels and stuff they had at the time of the 1920s. Only instead of being a roaring 20s, we're going to have a soaring 20s because it's a combination of an economic boom and a technological boom that are feeding off each other. And so this positive feedback loop is going to be sparked by this by the language around the tax redo. Okay, it's not a reform; it's a total redo. Right? They've eliminated a lot of issues there. So this money coming back is going to create a resurgence. A new kind of an American is going to be arising out of this resurgence. And we're going to be in a new great generation forming, okay? Not the millennials, but the ones that are behind them are going to be like another one of the greatest generation that fought World War II in the 1900s from the United States perspective. And so that generation is going to be busting out at a very young age because of the combination of all of the circumstances in which they're living. And so we're really getting into a period that I didn't want to say Yankee trader. I didn't want to say mercantilism, because it's not that. That led us into the current level of being all lawyered up as a society. And what we're going to do, according to the data sets, is to spring off of these economic changes that are so significant and create a whole new social order that is really like the Soaring 20s is really a good image for what we're getting into. It'll be a period of economic boom that will continue for some time. It'll be an economic renaissance that will be along with a technological and a scientific renaissance that will also include this look back at human history. And that all these things will combine to create a new America, and a new American will emerge. So in the past, we've had like the stereotypical Americans that were formed by, like major writers, like Mark Twain wrote The Innocents Abroad, and talking about Americans doing the grand tour, they called it, of Europe. And so that defined what America was to itself and the rest of the world for a generation. And then we had the ugly American in the 50s and the 60s. And again, that defined Americans to themselves and to the world. And we're about to go through another situation where by 2020, we will have this new image, whatever it will be, of this new American emerging in their place in the world. And it won't be Pax Americana. It won't be America, the police state, trying to control the planet. China is going to be the dominant economy, but right there next to them is going to be this resurgent USA. It's going to be really thrilling. I'm quite excited to read the stuff within the data and to write the report that I've come through in these last couple of months because of the successful optimism that is appearing relative to that. And you're seeing the language around the tax restructure, around the bond debacle, and a lot of these kind of things, all combining at this point from which will spring off on this new adventure.
I'll get to the bonds in just a minute, but being you brought it up, it sounds to me like Trump gets a second term. Am I wrong?
I don't have anything to contradict that. I do have some things to suggest that is the case.
Okay. My next question is that it's the debt. Another thing that I just had David Stockman on, former White House budget director in the Reagan administration, understands big numbers, smart guy. Also, Martin Armstrong, just my two most recent interviews, and both of them agreed on this point, and that was something's going to have to be done to the debt. We're going to have a spiking interest rate situation. It's going to catch a lot of people flat-footed because it's going to go up. The interest rates are going to go up a lot faster than anybody imagined. What say you about when you said bond debacle? What say you about the coming bond debacle? Let's just go with your word.
What's going to happen is exactly that. We're going to have interest rates that are taken out of the hands of the Fed. They're going to rise very rapidly. It's going to cause a lot of people to be euphoric because at the same time that's occurring, and I don't know the mechanism, so I just know what the data is telling me. But at the same time that is occurring, we're getting a global rise of confidence within the dollar and within the dollar management. And that causes the dollar to gain purchasing power slightly against the other failing fiat currencies. And the bond action causes people to want to move out of the dollar also at that same period of time. So it's really weird. It's all jammed together. You can't really think of them two separately. But as the bonds are going to go through this huge hiccup and start being able to deliver yield, they are showing in our data, even though the market is gigantic, is showing as chasing the cryptocurrencies relative to the yield component. So cryptocurrencies will still have a greater yield. This is indicating that people will be still flocking to get in cryptos as rapidly as they can. And this will continue to press on that, even with an appreciating dollar relative to the other fiat. All of this is coming down as a result of I guess what we're going to have to think of is bond vigilantes, although I don't have the same usual kind of language about about them relative to the initiation of the bond debacle.
I mean, when you say bond vigilantes, I mean people are going to be saying, game's over. No. You got to pay us more money for this. No,
correct.
You got to pay us, and if you buy these bonds, then that's inflation, and so that's what you're talking about. They're going to be all over the Fed and all the other central banks.
Right. Well, we do have stuff in our data sets that are hearkening us back to the hyperinflationary period, the same kind of language that we saw in Germany at the end of World War I, which was 1917 through 1919. And then again, slightly in the Weimar Republic in the 20s. Now we have a wrinkle on this, though, because our previous look at this kind of data had been in absence of cryptocurrencies as an ecosystem. So now, as the bonds are going through their upheaval, they are basically the bond issuers are going to find themselves in direct competition to yield levels that can come out of the cryptocurrencies. So look at it this way. As a regular retail purchaser of a savings vehicle, would you rather get, at the moment, it's what, 0.05% if you're lucky on a dollar,
Yeah.
But you could get a yield of 1,000% on cryptocurrencies in this last year if you chose the right ones. Even if you just chose Bitcoin, you would have gone 1,000% gain in 2017, and our expectation is that something close to that in 2018. So under the circumstances, how can bonds possibly compete? Even on volume, they're getting to the point where, yeah, they can absorb a lot more money, but even that's going to be temporary. And so they're really going to have to, take it up a notch, kick up their game and their offering just to stay viable. And the data sets show that the bonds don't, that the bond debacle is not an event, it's a process. It's going to continue from about mid-2018 through into 2020. It'll take a long time to come unraveled. There's a lot of stuff involved. But at the same time, there are going to be a big flush that some of the organizations will get as a result of the rising bond rates. But again, it's competition, and the bonds are going to lose relative to cryptocurrencies. This can be looked at another way too, and that is that we're in a major transition. Every time we've had a major transition of, let's say, the speed of the social order. So we used to be on horses, and so a silver and a gold standard of actual coins being exchanged was good enough, right? Because we traveled by horses pulling us, or we rode on them. We got to automobiles, and at the same time we get into automobiles and trains, we get to the point where it's not good enough to carry a lot of gold and silver coins. We need some vehicle better than that, and so we're all really into paper. As we get into the jet age, we've got to get that paper accelerating. It's got to go faster. And so we start going to direct deposit and a digital representation of your bank account. So it's not just not numbers written in a little passbook kind of a thing, but it's simply 100% digital. We're all on a digital system now with the jet airplanes, but now we're going into space. And we're going to get into space-based businesses and so on. And so the speed of the money potential, even within the digital dollars, is not sufficient, and it's also not as secure and robust as we need, and therefore now we've got the cryptocurrencies. They're the new wave of the future relative to money. In a generation, that generation will, 20 years from now, they'll look back and they'll never have handled coins, never have handled checks, and will never really have dealt very much with centrally issued digital dollars.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to come up with the what's been going on just at the last few days of the week. I mean, Bitcoin was all over the place. They have these what do you call them? These not ETFs, the exchanges. These futures markets, I should say. And wow, Bitcoin was down to 10,000, back up to 13,000 in a few hours. I mean, it's bouncing all over the place. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin and this wild gyrations at the end of the year? Manarino says this, and the Wall Street boys are out gaming this market. That's why they came up with the futures. They're trying to game it. What say you? Are they going to kill Bitcoin and cryptos? Evidently not.
No, it doesn't work that way. I like Greg, but I don't know that. I think they may be trying to game it, but I actually think that it's their new toy. It's the first time we've had a commodity listed on the exchange, and I can't remember the last time such a thing occurred in my lifetime. And so here's a new commodity that they can actually play with. They don't want to destroy it. That's a wrong way to think about it. They may certainly would. There are people within the federal central bank cadres that would like to control it, but even that's not going to happen. The futures, according to the data sets we've got from our previous report, show themselves as shooting themselves in the foot. The gyrations you're talking about, and so you remember that when you contacted me earlier this week to remind me about this, the report, we were probably 17,000 or so.
Yes.
And I said, no, my call for 13.8 was not wrong. Because we hadn't gotten to February yet. And I also pointed out that every so often we get, every couple of months we get a nice new consolidation within the Bitcoin price. And this is what forms the backside of what I've called crocodile teeth. Not being a chartist, it just looks like crocodile teeth. And to get to the backside, you have these big, very precipitous drops. And it is these precipitous drops that are going to kill the idea of a futures market, because you'll always end up being stopped on limits, because Bitcoin likes dropping 20 and 30% when it does it, and it may do that 6 times a year. And so it's going to be somewhat unpredictable and unstable for the futures. They won't be able to hold on. And it's just a very interesting time. I suspect that the data sets will still be right, and that we'll shed 13,880. We'll see the last of it sometime before mid-February.
Does it go up between now and then? Because
sure. It's like what they call range bound. Okay, so it'll bounce around between a little bit lower than 13,000 and a little bit higher, back and forth for a month or so here, and then we'll get into February. Conditions will have changed. The data shows a underlying pressure. So companies that are involved in the crypto sphere, in the crypto space, will be bringing out products that will be accepted in the market and be very successful. And their actions will cause draw more people into the crypto space, and that will bring the pressure that will bust Bitcoin out of this current set of range that's going to hover around 13,800. And I'm not saying that's a midpoint or anything. That's just the number that we get in our data. It may drop down to 10,000, although it seems within the data sets that it's going to hover closer to the 13,000 on the bottom, but it may go as high as 17, 18,000 again, and then drop down, and then back up and drop down again. There's some indications we're going to see 13,800 on an up cycle 3 times again, the same way we did the $428. Seems like a lifetime ago, but it was barely 2 years. And as we get into, as I've maintained for all of last year, and is still showing in the data for this report, as we get into mid-February, those who have the ability to look forward will see just 15, 18 days from then, so early March, the beginning of of our next big up leg within the crypto space in general, as I say, the bottom up pressure builds with these new products coming on out. A lot of the products are going to be extremely, wildly successful, and it's going to get us into another euphoric burst that will carry us through into May.
Oh, and I got to tell you, I'm not saying you were wrong. I think you were totally right. I think you were early, but blew past that. So I think you said that at around 1,800. I don't know. You said that. What? Huh? 13. A lot of people said the same thing. But
yeah,
but you were right. I mean, it went way past that. Come on. That's a heck of a call.
See, here's the thing, Guy. What I get is I get a juxtaposition of a date and a number. So I knew we would be over the 13,000 before February because it always does the consolidation stuff. And in order to be done with 13,000, we had to be out of the end of that period of time. We actually had some early indications for passing the 13,000 in December, but I don't talk about those because I don't do trading. And so from my viewpoint, the significant thing is that this bottom of the step is 13,800, and we step up off of that in February into March. And prior to that, it's just this up and down stuff.
And then that must be coincide with what you were talking about with the bonds also. So the pressure also is that as the bond market falters, people will say, well, I'll take Bitcoin. I mean, at least it's going to, be, is that what you're saying? That the bond market falters, people say, well, okay, I'm going to go into Bitcoin. And I've had enough.
Well, yes. And then there's this other aspect of it, okay, that really needs serious consideration. And so I'm going to state it a different way than I have in the past, but it has to do with the adoption cycle for technology. And we've got a situation where if you want to look at it one way, there's, as I've described it, there's about 1.5% to 3% of the population that we can consider to be innovators. Now, the next tranche of the people that are coming into Bitcoin are not the innovators. They're the variously described as early adopters or visionaries. And in the past, I've described it as the process of these people coming on in, but let me just state it as the lump sum, so to speak. If we look at the total population of the planet and say that there's maybe 1.5% of the population of the planet that's involved in cryptocurrencies, well, this next tranche, this next cohort that's coming in is 13.5% of the population.
Oh, you get big moves.
Exactly. And see, this is what's going to kill the idea of futures, because we're still going to form these crocodile teeth. And so each and every time that we do so, we're going to have a correction that will probably be, I mean, Bitcoin seems to like these corrections, these consolidations of around 30 to 40%.
Wow.
And that's when we establish our strong hands and wash out the weak players. And it's not like a minor correction of 3 or 4 or 5% that you might see in a controlled market like the stock market. And so people have a visceral feeling in their guts. We get these impressions coming into the data so that we know that when these things are coming. And the action is the 30% drops will be from higher levels to a higher low as we're still on this building trend, but it's not going to be able to be maintained as exponential. These little exponential bursts, like from 10,000 to 17,000, that nearly straight line that you would see in the charts, those always precede the consolidation, and that forms the backside of the crocodile tooth. And we have a number of those lined out for this next year, and some really big numbers, because coincidentally, of course, when you get to, so one way to look at it is, well, within our data sets, as we get close to 64,000, we're going to get another one of these. Well, at 60,000,
64,000. I want to just $64,000 this year for Bitcoin.
Not in 2017. No.
I mean, I'm sorry, 2018. 2018.
Yeah.
64,000 in 2018. You think Bitcoin will hit?
Oh, it'll go higher than that
in 2018.
Yeah.
I just want people to remember, for anybody who's sitting there going, say what? I mean, the last time you said this,
but hey,
it was $1,000, and you were saying it was going to go to 13.8.
Right, and I was saying 13.8 when it was under 1,000.
That's right. And I'm like, what? And I had people write me going, how can that be? That's a Ponzi scheme. Well, evidently it wasn't. So
yeah, so
you think it's going to go higher? So how high do you think this will go in 2018? Or you were going to say, here's what we're looking at. Fire away. I was going
to say, here's what we're looking at, because the idea is that people need to understand that Bitcoin is not like the stock market. So when it gets close to the 60s, in the 64,000 range, we're going to have another 30% drop. And so a third of that is going to be over, in the order of $20,000 drop. And so one way to look at it is, oh my God, Bitcoin's going to go down $20,000 in 2018. But another way is but it's going down to the mid 40s in 2018. So big deal, and then it'll go back up from there. It's just one of these consolidations. I do have numbers, because of the emotional impact and the linguistics involved. I have numbers that would seem to suggest that we may hit 100,000 next year, in 2018. The way that they're shaping up within the long-term data is fully supported. It's complete and correct within our processing. There's no equivocation within it, because the linguistics have supporting sets that go to how the information is going to be received by the general population. So in other words, we have a range of emotions that are associated with this number of 100,000, so that people will be whispering it just in awe, and then other people are going to just be shouting it until they almost burst their lungs. So, it's going to be an interesting time.
I want to just get into gold, silver, gold. You're big on silver. You have said in the past that the industrial uses for silver are so important that it really can't be used as a monetary metal. Gold, silver. I mean, if silver goes up, gold will probably go up too. But you like silver more. What's your predictions for silver and gold? We haven't had the big moves yet, but we haven't had a bond market blowout, and we haven't had a stock market problem or anything like that. Go ahead.
Right. The thing for silver is that there's been a tie in our data for, maybe 18 months or more between silver and what we can think of as an energy coin, an ICO that's designed, a token that's designed to facilitate the movement of silver into the industrial usages of it. This language, these sets are still talking about very high price for silver. It's also talking about everybody dishoarding the monetary silver and the coins actually being melted down for industrial use. So at that stage, the price as an industrial commodity is greater than its ability to be used as a monetary unit. And now with the cryptocurrencies, this all makes sense.
And what
Where we
price
would
would
get
that be when
Oh,
people start
or
just
600 or over. I mean, I've got data sets now that show $1,000 an ounce for silver, but I don't think that's 2018. I think that may be 2019 once we get into this new into the Renaissance. Okay, we might as well just call it that. There's a
okay?
technical Renaissance coming. We should be able to see it by fall of next year in the form of new products that are being offered, actual new devices. Many of them will be like energy devices. Maybe it's a little device you'd aim at your cup of coffee to heat it up. I don't know, but little tiny consumer level energy devices, right? That will be transmitting as opposed to contact based. So they'll be transmitting, sort of like little ray gun kind of thing showing up in our social order. And so this the new electrics are going to consume silver in a very serious way. There's going to be a technical breakthrough in 2019 that will allow us to stretch the silver supply even further because they'll be able to do more interesting things with less of it. And it will rise up in terms of its value even through 2019 and 2020. But it will be against a background of a lot of people saying, okay, so silver's $1,000 an ounce. I don't really care. Now's the time to sell it so that I can get into this particular new cryptocurrency, or so I can buy one of these flying cars or something along those lines. So there's a showing in our data sets of what may be generational. I don't know. It may relate to the demographics of the generations, but it's basically a turning over. So people that have been saving stuff are going to reinvest it, get it out into the social order. We're going to leave behind us, to a certain extent, the negative visions that we've been held under by the oppressing of the society, by the idiots, the stupid, evil cabal, the Luciferians, all of these the pedophiles. They've dampened society down for a number of years, for decades. They've caused a twisting of our collective emotional balance towards the negative, and have held it there for 30 or 40 years. That's breaking loose. As it breaks loose, there will be a tendency for people to not be hoarding against an inevitable decline, as they will see around them a rising, a breakout, a flowering, all different kinds of words going to, a blooming of the society, a reinvigoration, all of this kind of stuff, a new optimism. And during that period of time, the old ideas of what we used to value and how we did so will change. Now, on gold, we still have a connection that shows gold being about a third the value in February of Bitcoin. So that would place it somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 an ounce, in that 3,000 to 5,000, let's just say, as we get into spring. Now, I say February. I'm not saying it will occur on a particular day in February or anything. I'm saying that's when our first data sets hit that show this relationship between gold and Bitcoin. That continues for some time into summer, and then it would appear that Bix-Weir's Road to Ruta theory is validated, and that there's going to be some level of secrets revealed about gold and the amount of the stuff on the planet, such that we'll start thinking of gold like diamonds, that scarcity exists in gold only because of control, not because of actual material in the ground. And so it's going to be a changing world for gold and silver. Again, I go back to the data sets that describe this as a multi-generational, multi-century progress from rocks as money, gold and silver being the rocks, very similar to the rocks that the people in Yap used to use as their money. And we just have a slightly more portable form. And now we're moving all the way up into the ephemeral of the cryptocurrencies, because we're going into space-based businesses in a really big way, and you don't transmit gold and silver into space in order to pay off your employees.
Okay, so do we get a crash in the markets, or is that old thinking? Do we get a crash in the banking system? Do we get any kind of a crash in 2018? Evidently, it doesn't sound like we get any kind of a crash from your data, or am I wrong?
Okay, it would depend on the time frame you're looking at. If you're talking about something that will occur violently within a day, there are a lot of small crashes that will occur throughout the system. However, we're in the crash. It began in January of 2017. It'll continue through to 2022. In 2018, we will have some spectacular failures. Again, the northern Italian banks pop up. The German banking system is extremely highlighted in the data sets, and we're going to get fantastic levels of failures within the central bank-led world, but they're not going to be catastrophic to the extent they would have been even 2 years ago. So it's not going to lead to the Rothschilds' coveted New World Order money. It's not going to lead to a single currency. It's not going to lead to a central world government. They've lost, and the decentralized nature of humanity is going to bust out such that as the old system is crumbling all around us, banks failing, regional bank failures, all of these kind of things going on, we are going to have the new economy working its way up through the holes and supplanting all of those in a very rapid fashion. And it's going to be quite shocking to people. So that in 3 years from now, in 2020, when you look back in these 2 years, you'll be able to just, it'll be a head-slapping moment as to how things have changed. And people that are young enough to that they'll in 4 or 5 years not remember this particular decade will never think that life was ever involving anything other than the cryptocurrencies sci-fi world that we'll be living in by the time we get into the 2020s.
And what about social unrest? That kind of thing. This big social order, social justice, which is really Marxism and communism. The NFL is biting down on it. It's unbelievable. Yeah. Really unbelievable. They're out planning. I brought up my weekly news wrap or my Christmas message that they're planning social advocacy. What? I thought you were supposed to play football, not have social advocacies. Do we have a social unrest in America when all these violent changes happen?
Yes, we do, but not like George Soros would have it. Okay, not like Antifa envisions it. These people are out of step with history. The data sets are showing that and they have I think I first talked about this in maybe June or July of this year, but the data sets have had this clampdown coming where the funding sources for a lot of the social unrest are going to be clamped down at the spigot, so to speak, and shut it off. And then there's also, along within the tax stuff, in our data sets, some sets that suggest there's going to be seizures of vast quantities of wealth from individuals that have been basically trying to steer society with their wealth. And the collective won't like it, and it'll just start saying, okay, so much for you. We're just going to seize all your bank accounts, and if you show up in the country, we'll seize you as well. So to that extent, it will actually some of the linguistics at a minor level, less than 18%, will replicate some of the activities that occurred in previous centuries in major social transitions, like the transition out of the Tsarist empire into the revolution that then the Bolsheviks took over. And so we'll see some language that will replicate this as governments decide that they're being harassed, and that a free society does not mean open to anybody meddling with it, and they'll start taking action. And then, to their surprise, they'll find that a very large percentage of the population actively backs these efforts and supports them, even unto the point of getting out onto the streets to voice their opinion that, yeah, this is the route we need to go.
It's the George Soroses of the world have the hammer brought down on them, and their assets are taken, is what you're saying.
Well, they have their wallets seized, and that really shuts off their ability to cause problems.
Okay, and this is it in your report, and I'm going to wrap it up here. War card. Are you getting any kind of war rumblings at all? I don't know if you're getting any of that at all or not. Just briefly, because I know it's not in your report.
We do have some of that. There is some stuff around North Korea, but it's much more China focused. And so if I had to say right now, I would say that the United States interest in hassling North Korea about things will be preempted by the Chinese. And if I had to point to it, I would say March or April is the most likely period of time that China is going to say, okay, we can't have any more of this stuff. We've got enough problems here. And because of X, Y, Z, we're just going to go in and shut down the problem source at this particular point.
That's North Korea.
Correct.
You're saying China is going to shut down North Korea. Enough of this. You don't get to have nuclear weapons.
No, I'm not saying they're going to try and take away nukes or anything. I'm saying that explicitly that the data sets show that China doesn't like the United States trying to, or the United States and North Korea interaction on their border and the potential problems, and they will decide, as much as they don't want to do it and as much as it's a pain in the butt because it's going to cost them money and time and effort and lives, they are going to go and try and preempt what would otherwise be a massive catastrophe for China, because you have to understand their interest is not North Korea, or North Korea even getting nuked for that matter. They don't really care about that. What they care about are the millions of North Koreans that would flood across the border as a vast humanitarian refugee problem should things go the way that they appear to be heading. And so in our data sets, the Chinese come across as being far sighted enough to think that if we move now, we can surround, and they play Go where other countries play chess. And so in Go, you surround and you work ahead a number of moves, surround them, and then take the strategic stone right out of the mix because of what you've done. And so that's what our data shows, that China, through diplomacy, economics, and military, is able to unseat the ruling elites within North Korea to the extent that the situation changes from that point on. And China is still monkeying about with and involved with North Korea 7, 8, 9 months later. So we can make some assumptions from some of the brief little bits of stuff we've got in the data that China is dealing with all of this to try and sort it out so that they don't have this huge humanitarian problem to deal with of a flood of 10 or 20 or 30 million people trying to just simply survive. And the only way to do it is to leave the remnants of North Korea and cross into China. They don't want that.
I'm going to leave it right there. That's good news. This is the report. You'll see it on halfpasthuman.com. You'll scroll down. You'll see this. You can buy the report. How much does this one go for, Cliff?
It's $99. It's crypto focused.
Focused, but there's a lot in it. I mean, oh my God, it's how many pages is this? Is it 29?
It'll probably run over 35.
35 pages. Wow. Halfpasthuman.com. There's no way we got to it all. It's just a lot to it. I've read the reports, very detailed, very interesting. I mean, you can't just read it and go, okay, I got it. I mean, you got to read it and then reread it and then read it again. And wow, there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there. You're a smart guy. That's not a criticism. You're a smart guy. The reports are very detailed. You spend a ton of time on them. You have billions and billions of pieces of data that you go through and you compile and go out and get. I mean, so for people, you didn't just learn this, in a day. You were a big hitter for Microsoft. I mean, all the really hard stuff all over the world to fix, data-wise, they called on you to do it for about 10 years, I do believe. Isn't that right?
Yeah. And I started this predictive linguistics in '97, so it's been maturing for 2 decades now. So it's gotten pretty good.
Yeah, well, you've said that in the past I couldn't read the data that well, and I've gotten better and better at reading the data and being able to apply it better into predictions. So it's I'm sure it'll be better now 5 years from now than it is today. Just like it was better than it was 5 years ago. But this is some report. Yep. I mean, this is a big, far-reaching report. Talking about Renaissance, talking about cryptocurrencies. There's some pretty good news in it, too. So, Clif High, halfpasthuman.com. Go to the halfpasthuman.com page. Scroll down. You'll see the report. Clif High, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Thank you much, Greg. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.